afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Laura Hebb-Kessel. I am the Director of Telehealth Services for the SIU School of Medicine. But in my role today, I'm serving as the Chair of Rural Partners, the state's Rural Development Council. We are so grateful to Extension for partnering with us and hosting this webinar series. We've got a great webinar today that we're going to offer you. Thanks for joining us. We go through a few housekeeping items before we get started. Because we have so many on the line, please mute your mic and stop your video to help with bandwidth issues. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat space. We will or should have time at the end of this presentation to get through some of those questions. So enter those at any time during the presentation and we'll come back to those. If you're having any audio difficulty, please post those questions in the chat space and someone from Extension will provide technical assistance to you. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available later on the LGE website. Nancy will usually send an email out within the next few days with a link to the recording of the video as well as a copy of the PowerPoint slides from today. So if you have registered for today's webinar, you will get that email. If you did not register, you will not receive that. So if you are interested in receiving that email but didn't register, please include your email address in the chat box so we can make sure that you get on that email. Just real quickly about Rural Partners, again, we're the state's Rural Development Council. We're a working volunteer board. We try to partner with public-private partnerships across the state and try to just try to make connections for folks interested in rural issues. We do have membership levels. If you're interested in being a member, I'll include a link to our website in the chat box so you can learn more about us, and please reach out if you're interested in joining our organization. Dan Silvas from Extension does send out a weekly newsletter on behalf of Rural Partners. It's a short newsletter, but it's got some great information articles in there, including information about our future webinars in this series. So if you're interested in getting on our newsletter list, you can let us know that as well. So again, thanks to Extension for partnering with us on this series. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. So Matt Dunn is the founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovation, which is a national nonprofit committed to creating economic opportunities in rural America by developing digital ecosystems to support entrepreneurship and job creations. A lot of times I stop there, but Matt's got a really interesting background, so I'm just going to quickly read just the rest of his bio. A Vermont native and Brown University grad, Matt previously served 11 years in the state legislature, focusing on broadband policy and downtown redevelopment efforts, and was tapped by the Clinton administration in '99 to lead the AmeriCorps Vista program. In 2007, he started Google's Community Affairs Division out of a former bread factory in rural Vermont, helping lead the Google Fiber rollout in addition to the company's US philanthropy and engagement efforts. So we're so thankful to Matt for being here with us today. We're thankful to Norm for making the introduction, and I'm going to hand it over to Matt. Thank you.
Great. Laura, thank you so much for that introduction, and delighted to be here and chatting with folks in rural America who are focused firmly on the future of their communities' economies. I'm going to walk through a variety of subjects to both understand what is happening in rural economies as well as our theory of change, and then hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. So the Center on Rural Innovation is an action tank that is dedicated to addressing this particular mission, which is advancing inclusive rural prosperity through digital economy ecosystems that support scalable entrepreneurship and tech job creation. Now, that's not your usual rural economic development type of mission. It is specific, and we're going to unpack each of these different sections to understand where we're coming from with this. So the reason the reason our organization exists and we got this launched is because of this graph. And for those of you who study, economics in America, it's hopefully a familiar one, because we had something unprecedented happen after the 2008 recession, which is that all communities across the country fell hard after that recession. Rural fell harder, which is also not completely unusual. But what was really unusual was the completely unequal recovery. Urban areas came roaring right back past their pre-recession levels, and rural places did not. And so that as of January of 2020, before the pandemic hit, not even half of all rural counties in our country had gotten back to their pre-recession levels. COVID hit. Everybody fell, but in fact, the urban places basically came back to where they were before the 2008 recession. Rural places fell to new lows. And the question then becomes, why did this happen? Why was this a unique thing that hit during this recession time and in a very underreported way? And the answer to that is three major drivers. One is automation. The second was globalization. And the third was the decline of entrepreneurship in rural places. So automation had been, chugging right along, but when the recession hit, it accelerated as companies were looking to find cheaper for the long term ways to create goods and services, and tech companies were starting to really hit an inflection point of accelerating. The second was globalization, which was also supported by the fact that the recession caused companies to want to look for lower cost labor markets, lower cost even than in rural America. And policies also came alongside them to encourage that kind of global look for talent. And then the decline in entrepreneurship in rural America had taken place for really the 30 years prior to the Great Recession. And the problem was when you hit the Great Recession, there wasn't the farm team of companies that usually would come in after an economic shock, would remove ones that may have been holding on for a while, were ready to move on, and then you have a new set. But if you don't have those entrepreneurs coming in behind, you're not going to be able to fill that void. And during that period of time, the majority of the jobs that were created were with firms of less than 10 years of age. And so not having an entrepreneurial strong suit in those 30 years previous really had an impact. And unfortunately, the automation and globalization did not affect everyone equally. In fact, globalization and automation, to be clear, created millions and millions of jobs in the United States, and it removed millions and millions of jobs. The problem is that it almost exclusively created them in urban places and almost exclusively removed them in rural. And the biggest indicator of this was the kinds of jobs that were the fruits of automation. The technology jobs that were actually creating new companies, new solutions to marketplace problems that were automated and usually are represented in computer and math jobs, almost completely got created in large urban metro areas, even metro areas that were, cities relative to the rest of their state. And so we saw that growth happen only in those cities and not in rural places. And there was lots of impacts for that. The types of jobs that are created are ones that are mobile and are ones that create incredible economic mobility. And so we saw some things happen that, again, were really underreported right after that recession. This graph on the left is population changes. And the farm crisis, which many of us thought was the biggest economic hit to rural places that happened in 1984, 85, led to some decreases in population growth in rural places. But it wasn't until 2011, 12, 13, and 14 that you actually saw net loss of population in rural America. In addition, it wasn't everybody leaving across the board. It was much more likely to be college graduates and college graduates with debt who had become convinced that they needed to go to cities in order to be able to get the earnings, in order to get the existential threat of that college debt off their shoulders. Even though frequently the cost of living in those cities would erase any of that net gain they would make, at least in the first 10 years. So what you had was an exodus of college graduates, which doesn't mean that you need only college graduates in order to create economic prosperity. But if you begin to skew in terms of those demographics, it does have an impact. And then, of course, there was the deaths of despair, which hit rural places disproportionately. And that included suicide as well as drug overdoses. And whether that was a cause or an effect of the economic challenges, it doesn't really matter. It complicated things dramatically during that same period of time. Unfortunately, the march towards automation continues, and it is continuing in a way that currently threatens rural jobs in a disproportionate kind of way. So the jobs that remain in rural are the most likely to be automated moving forward. And we saw through the pandemic where automation again took off, not just because there was a recession and people were looking for lower cost ways to do things. They were also looking for ways to prevent human contact. And automation was a great solution for that in many cases. And those changes and transformations are likely to stick for the long term. So there's some urgency to our work to make sure that we're actually able to create jobs that provide economic mobility, but also are resilient in the face of automation moving forward. So we talk about digital economy jobs as being that solution. And when we talk about digital economy jobs, we're talking about these. And there's lots of definitions that could come in, but they are the core types of jobs that are the fuel of automation, software engineering, certainly, but also cybersecurity analysts or IT specialists, which have multiple entry points. So this is not just for people graduating with PhDs from big universities or fancy colleges. People can come in with lots of different competencies, education backgrounds, and start on a career ladder in this space. But they are in these particular categories, which do pay well compared to other job occupations that are available. Which brings us to the Center on Rural Innovation's North Star, which is basically this, that rural America represents 15% of our nation's workforce, but only 5% of the digital economy jobs. And we believe that in order to get to equity based on geography, you need to get that 5% up to 15%. Now, this does not mean that all digital economy jobs have to be in rural or that all rural jobs have to be digital economy jobs. It just means a proportion of those economies need to be in order to make sure that they're able to import cash and export value in an era of automation, and that they're able to be resilient and they have the kinds of skill set that can pivot as our country continues to be an innovation and technology leader in the world. So then the question becomes, how do you do that? And we have an approach that has a number of different components to it. There's a joke that for every complex problem, there's a simple solution, and it's wrong. And I think this is certainly in that category. So this is a model for how we look at rural economic development with our particular efforts. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see a number of things that you all probably recognize as building blocks for a rural economy that can be successful, whether it's housing or making sure you've got public health and safety systems in place and good quality pre-K all the way through to secondary education and all of those things. They are super, super important, and we don't do any of those. Lots of other people have talent in being able to do that kind of work, particularly with working with small Main Street businesses, downtown redevelopment, all that other stuff. And so we just want to recognize that it's not that we don't think these are important. We think they're fundamentally important. It's just not the focus that we have to be able to build on that and create digital economy jobs for the future. Then comes the necessary infrastructure for digital economy ecosystems. Broadband is front and center, right? It's kind of your table stakes. You need to have high-speed internet to be able to compete in the marketplace, to have a level playing field. The good news is that COVID, I think, woke people up to the fact that it is not a luxury anymore, that it's a necessity for education, for healthcare, and for employment. But it's also the way that you can make the case that a company that's located in a rural place can have access to markets and talent anywhere in the world, but you've got to have that broadband. And with that awareness has come a substantial amount of funding from the federal government as well as from states. And now folks are actually involved in deploying it. We actually have a whole team that just works on supporting communities to bring future-proof fiber to the home. Happy to talk about that later, but it is absolutely critical to the success of a rural community being able to succeed in building a digital economy ecosystem. And there are places and spaces, so co-work spaces and entrepreneurship spaces that can actually bring people together because density does matter. The ability to bring people into close proximity that are excited about solving market problems or technology solutions, and creative types that are willing to think outside the box and push people to new ways of thinking. That is important. And it happens naturally in a city because there's just a whole bunch of people there. It certainly can happen in rural places. You just have to be intentional about it. And that's why we see building these kinds of shared places and community spaces that are focused on digital economy workers and entrepreneurship are critical fundamental steps. And then the third is local leadership. And that is something that we think of as infrastructure, right? It's making sure that folks on the ground have an understanding of digital economy jobs and drivers and the way to attract tech workers and do startups and all of that, as well as making sure that the leadership of the municipality understands why this is an important direction. And you have folks who are on the boards of the organizations that are going to be driving this that also get it and are willing to do that leadership work in their community. So those are the infrastructure components that we think are necessary. And then come what we call the direct drivers, which are the programmatic elements that are necessary to create a flywheel of a digital economy ecosystem. And so that certainly includes doing, your training, right? You're training people how to be IT specialists or coders or other kinds of things. But what we've seen is that when you just do tech training, rural folks take to it really, really fast, including people from different educational backgrounds and family backgrounds and everything else. And they learn really well, and then they move. And that doesn't actually solve it, right? Because you actually are accelerating more of the folks who are, taking the bull by the horns and wanting to move forward because they're not seeing jobs locally. So we also believe that you need to create the access to digital jobs at the same time. And those can be local jobs at banks and hospitals that need technologists and unfortunately frequently look to cities and pay huge amounts of money, Brooklyn or Chicago or San Francisco to get that talent when in fact they could actually source it locally. But it's also as more and more companies are looking to the opportunity of distributed work to be able to work for larger national firms. So those are certainly pieces to it. But there's also the fact that you want to make sure that some of the jobs that are being created are from locally based companies. And so that's why we emphasize the need to create the support systems for scalable tech entrepreneurship. That includes accelerators, incubators to de-risk it for people at early stages in their companies, mentor networks, startup weekends. All of those things are super important to be having in your community so that you can be creating those homegrown companies and the wealth that comes along with that as they grow and succeed along the way. It's absolutely important to have access to capital, and not just any capital, but capital that's specifically willing to invest in those kinds of early stage scalable tech companies, which is not going to be your traditional bank. they're not going to be willing to do that if they don't have lots of collateralized assets. So it's angel networks and other kinds of things. We actually have our own seed capital fund, which I'll talk about in a second, but that's a super important piece of the puzzle. And then there's building a inclusive tech culture. And we talk about a tech culture because it really is important to have the meetups, the hackathons, the kinds of things that make technologists who are probably in your community, even if they don't all get together, they're just off, working out of their spare bedrooms trying to solve things, but giving them the space to be able to come together and to see that there are other folks who are interested in similar kinds of things, and then making it inclusive. And the reason we really recommend that is that it is, well, first of all, it's the absolute right thing to do. We do not want to keep making the same mistakes that Silicon Valley and Kendall Square made when they were sort of building out the first phase of technology ecosystems, because it looked like it was only for white dudes in hoodies, and that's not the case, and leaves behind all kinds of perspectives and ideas and talent that are out there. And if you're going to be doing this in a rural place, you're already going to be needing to access all of the talent that's out there. And so unless you're really proactive about being inclusive, you're not going to be able to capture that, and the likelihood of success is not going to be as high. And so if you do that and you create this flywheel of activities and programs, we have seen that you end up with the local wealth creation by the startups, as well as the quality digital employment that we mentioned, that can help start that climb from 5% of the digital economy jobs being in rural America to 15%. This is another way that we look at our theory of change, for those of you like me who are a little more visual. And this is a downtown building that I think many of you would recognize in your own downtowns. And we look at it as a full stack. So creating lofts and living spaces. It is amazing how many people are really excited to live in a cool, beautiful, historic building in a downtown where they can just walk downstairs to get their coffee or jump on their bike and go around. It also creates, again, that added sense of density and culture in a downtown. In addition, we also think it's important to be co-locating a number of different activities that can create synergy. So having the accelerator and incubator space for new startups being in the same location as where there's co-working. So you can actually have people who are working for a company, someplace else, being able to see and interact with folks who are starting companies from scratch. And then on top of that, being able to do your digital job training in the same place is also very, very valuable. It's much easier to commit yourself to a, several month program to transform your skills into a new career trajectory if you see other people doing it. It makes it so much easier. You can also start to create natural mentorship networks and other kinds of things across the board. On the bottom is, the three, foundational elements, some of which we talked about before. We do think higher education has a lot of value in creating the first wave of rural innovation hubs. There's the faculty capacity. There's certainly the students, especially if there's a computer science program. There's trailing spouse value, which is not to be underestimated. And so we do look for places in at least our first phase that has an institution of higher education within a 40-minute drive time, typically a four-year endowed college or university campus. Broadband, we already talked about. Access to capital, we also already talked about, but definitely foundational building blocks. And then on the represented on the first floor is the amenities and coffee shops and gallery space and things like that that can create again a density and activity, those virtuous collisions that can happen where ideas are sparked. We sometimes joke that the real core to rural economic development are the three Bs, which are broadband, blues, and beer. And if you have those three, frankly, the rest of it might just come along naturally. But those are important. And while we don't do a lot of work on helping set those up, it's certainly something that you should be considering as you're looking to create an innovation hub somewhere in your community. It's going to be much more effective in this kind of a setup than often an industrial park, which is right for large-scale manufacturing. You want to create this energy. The other thing on this infographic is the taco truck. Now, we have a taco truck there because everybody loves the taco truck, and the taco truck is great for downtown energy. But it's also there just to make sure we're clear about the kinds of small businesses and startups that we're talking about. And we again focus on scalable tech companies. And helping someone to start a taco truck is not helping someone to start a scalable tech company. That's a local market company. A taco truck with a website is also not a scalable tech company. Now, a taco truck owner who works with a local technologist and creates a platform and an app that can be used by all taco trucks across the US and starts marketing it as a platform, now, that's a scalable tech company. And we actually have some interesting examples of those kinds of founders that one might not think of as a traditional Silicon Valley kind of founder that are becoming really successful tech entrepreneurs. We have one person who's in Wilson, North Carolina, who worked in the auto service industry, auto repair shops for a while, decided that the torture they put customers through and understanding when they had their appointment or whether they could use a loaner car or when it should be picked up and all of that was a solvable thing. And so they started something called Shift Auto that has been successful, but is clearly leveraging the experience of the founder having worked in that auto repair industry for so long in order to create a tech company to solve a market problem in that sector. So when we do our work, we are capacity builders. And we are not folks who come in and own and operate an innovation hub. That would be hard to scale, first of all. But also we think it would fail because it would lose the local context. And every community has incredible assets and may have some unique challenges in order to be able to be successful. So what we do is we work with communities to be able to do a clear assessment of their community, to know against a framework for digital economy jobs, to be able to create a strong strategy, and then to be able to get the resources to execute that strategy over a 3-year time horizon. So we measure our success in a variety of different ways. Certainly, we were very excited when 3 of our network communities launched scalable tech accelerator programs for the first time in February. I mean, that was just a big milestone. But we also have some immediate outcomes, which is that we help communities to raise the resources to be able to execute on these strategies. We focus in on the Build to Scale Venture Challenge, which is from the Economic Development Administration, and is specifically focused on scalable entrepreneurship. And for a long time, unfortunately, was seen as only being about cities or tier 1 research universities, when in fact the EDA felt strongly that it should be for everywhere, including rural places. And so we've been working closely with rural communities in our network to be able to secure those resources and the match to be able to move forward. Here are our communities. We have 20 communities across 18 states in all 4 time zones. And it is a really wonderful collection of rural places. They vary by geography, obviously, but they also range widely in terms of demographics and the economic origin. And all of those affect, again, the context that they come into, but they work together as a cohort. And we continue to help them along their journey as they're going from the strategy and funding to actually standing up an accelerator or creating a tech training program, leveraging a national training provider to be able to do it localized and make sure that they are bringing into this economy people who are underemployed. And then we also believe that the value is around the network itself and its aggregation. So if you add up all the populations of all these communities, it's a 1.2 million people. And that's the equivalent of the city of Dallas. So we think of it as a collective, and the community leaders think of it as a collective as well. They put their competitive edges, behind them, because in fact, doing this kind of work is not about, who can, bid high enough to get someone to locate an auto parts manufacturing arm of a company in their industrial park. It's about building capacity from the ground up. New economy jobs that can be working locally instead of folks outsourcing, or for companies on a distributed basis, and building startups from scratch that can grow, sometimes exit, which is fine, but those dollars and talent continue to be regenerative in those communities. And so that's the one commitment that we ask people to make, is that they will be truly collaborative and understand that as everyone succeeds in the network, everyone succeeds in the network. Our original funding came from Reid Hoffman, who was the founder of LinkedIn. And as a result, from day one, we were zeroed in on data. We do a lot of data and data analytics around rural economies and their trajectory. We have tools like the Tech Talent Tracker that's available for free on our website. So you can look at your community in terms of its technology employment quotient, as well as sources of tech talent that are in your region. You can compare it to other rural places, states, the US as a whole, and the like, just as sort of benchmark. And we have other tools, whether it's on Broadband or where all the breweries are in the United States, because that's also an important indicator. And these are all tools that we make available for free, but also inform our work to make sure that we are data-driven in the efforts that we do and the tools that we give to our network communities as they're continuing to look to transform their economies. This is the example of the Tech Talent Tracker. As I mentioned, an interactive tool that can help you look at the context of your own digital economy in terms of jobs. As I mentioned before, we do work on broadband. We're now working with 30 counties across rural Tennessee, but we're doing work in 9 other states as well, doing that pre-development work to make sure that we are allowing these communities to take advantage of this once-in-a-generation funding to finally solve the digital divide, and to do so with future-proof fiber to the home. And so we are working a lot in this area, and happy to chat more about that if that is a challenge that your communities are facing. This is a little more detail on the seed fund that we stood up. We were seeing early on that there wasn't a lot of capital becoming available for the few scalable tech companies that were coming to rural areas, and so we, with some supporters, put together our own seed fund. This is actually a little bit out of date. We are at 4 million in raised, and 16 investors who are involved. But it's a wonderful portfolio of companies, none of which, interestingly, are ag tech. The idea that you could only do something that is uniquely rural in the technology space if you're in a rural community is just not the case. In the age of the internet, there should be no limit to where digital economy jobs and startups that solve global marketplace problems can take place. Those entrepreneurs are out there, and we're just waiting for them to be unlocked. So these are all just super exciting companies that are doing well through the pandemic, which we were a little concerned about. We're continuing to deploy capital. We specifically invest in companies that are post-revenue, but pre-profit for the most part, and are in rural opportunity zones. By the way, I'm just looking at the chat, and I love every time I do this, we get another B. And Bill, I appreciate adding bicycles. When we were in Minnesota, and they said boats. So, you know, there's always another B to be added to the key, the 3 Bs for economic development. Quickly, a couple of profiles of communities that we work with. And, you know, this is Traverse City, Michigan, that some of you may have traveled to at one point or another, that has traditionally been a resort community. But a group of folks there decided that they wanted to diversify their economy to be able to make sure that the stratification that comes with tourist dependent communities could be deeper, and we could make sure that there's a growing, burgeoning middle class. So they put together a innovation hub with co-work spaces. They launched startup competitions. They put together a angel fund network, and they're just continuing to build that out over a period of time, and seeing lots of people who might only go up there for, you know, a few weekends a year decide, you know what, we can be in the place that we want to be for the long term. And it's been an exciting success in that northern part of Michigan. On the other side, over in the of the lake, over in the UP, Marquette, Michigan is taking a slightly different approach, but, you know, doing similar kinds of things. They're really leveraging the university that's there, Northern Michigan University, and their cybersecurity cluster that emerged after the Air Force station that was up there started to shut down. There was lots of capacity that then turned into a bit of a cybersecurity cluster. They've been doing additional building of that capacity and computer science education, and really looking to engage more students that are coming out of NMU to be able to create their own companies locally. These are examples. People sometimes say, what do you mean by startups that are in rural places? These are the kinds of companies that we're seeing that are, you know, raising capital, are growing quickly, and are going to be part of those communities for the long term. Again, there's a wide variety of them across the board, but these are communities in our network that are all fostering that kind of exciting entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I want to make sure we had time for questions. I haven't been keeping up with the with the chat completely, other than catching the bicycles along the way, but I think Laura is going to help as we are answering questions that you have.
Thanks, Matt. So there have not been a lot of questions, so I would encourage our participants to add some questions into the chat box if you have them. We do have plenty of time to get through those, so anything you were thinking about or wanted more information about during the session, please don't be shy. Add that information to the chat box. Matt, you mentioned someone added bicycles, and there was also in one of your earlier slides about the ecosystem, I believe, someone mentioned libraries during that time. So I wanted to mention that.
Sure. I mean, libraries, lots of civic institutions play a role in building out this kind of ecosystem and capacity. In some places, libraries have created maker spaces, which have been incredibly powerful areas for exploration, for trying new things, for being able to access, 3D printers that people can't just sort of, buy every day, and to be able to prototype and experiment. So libraries are absolutely part of that mix. Community colleges, even though they're not the universities and four-year colleges that I mentioned, we tend to look for at least having in a 40-mile drive time, 40-minute drive time, but are very important to this process as well, and could be great collaborative partners. And libraries, you know, are great co-work spaces. Depending on the library, some are more tolerant for that kind of work and have the accommodations for, you know, rooms where you can do a video conference and that kind of thing along the way.
Thanks, Matt. How small of a community is too small for this type of opportunity, in your opinion?
So right now, our communities range from 5,000 to 50,000 in population. And depending on who you talk to, that either seems, you know, unbelievably small, or, oh God, you're just dealing with the big cities. So given this is a rural place, you're probably on the latter part. But we do think there needs to be a bit of a critical mass for a downtown in order to be able to create that synergy. So we frequently will look to a county seat in a rural county, which fits into that category. And again, that's in our first wave. So little of this was getting a foothold in rural places of any kind. We were looking to find locations where there's just no excuse, right? There's no reason why Pikeville, Kentucky can't have a digital economy ecosystem, or a place like Marquette. And so we're starting there, but we are definitely open to working with smaller communities. I would also say that we do take a regional approach as well. We don't think it can be only about, you know, one municipality that is part of a larger county economy. So we have been proactive in creating those kinds of collaborative environments. We're working with Platteville, Wisconsin, and they are, you know, taking on a couple of county region that matches their regional planning commission to be able to do both outreach while still leveraging the UW Platteville campus, an asset that we think is going to be the preliminary driver.
Thank you. Could you address how a small community begins this exploration process?
Yeah. So
I'm thinking, Mike, the participant said they're thinking their community is.
Yeah, so there are a few things that we would encourage you to do. One is that we have some self-assessment tools on our website, which you can take a look at and start to go through. We've had some communities just start right down the road using that framework. We believe in open sourcing it. We would love to have lots of communities starting down this path. We're also, if you feel like you're already you know, heading in this direction and are excited to continue, we'd love to talk to you. We do webinars once every 3 weeks or so, just to see where people are and share a little bit more. I mean, similar to the presentation I made right now, but a little more detail. We are right now finalizing our cohort for the fall, which would be a full assessment, which is what we start with, then followed by a intense strategy process, which is, you know, real time on the part of the communities to make sure that we're doing it right and in context, and then applying for build to scale, which is typically a February grant offering timeframe. So if folks are interested in moving soon and quickly, they should definitely reach out soon, so that there is a so we would have a shot. Otherwise, we'd probably be looking to spring of 2022 to engage folks.
Thanks, Matt. Is there a model where a state has worked with Corey in a collaborative relationship with several small communities to share costs and services?
There is. You know what? I'm from and still live in Vermont. It's where our pilot was, and even though we, you know, knew that if we were going to prove that this was a thing, we had to go national. What was interesting is the success that was starting to be seen in Springfield, Vermont, attracted the interest of the Vermont Community Foundation. That then provided us with a grant to work with 4 additional communities across the state and create a state network. We've also talked to a couple of other states about doing it on a statewide basis. Montana, Minnesota, and at least one, Maine. They haven't yet pulled the trigger on it, but we think there is real opportunity to do that. We have seen some economies of scale in our work in Vermont, and we believe that that would be the case in a region as well, across a larger state. And how much economies of scale of actual cost it would be, not completely clear, because you've got to do intensive work with each and every community. And we sometimes joke, if you've seen one rural community, you've seen one rural community. And that's going to be true, across even, Illinois. But there's certainly synergy and collaboration that can happen if you do it on a statewide basis.
Matt, you
And
might have covered.
we'd welcome that conversation if anyone's interested.
Perfect. You might have mentioned this, but someone asked about a startup budget for creating the ecosystems regarding building, staff, investment fund. Can you speak give any more detail to that?
So I don't have an estimate for building because it's just going to depend, right? There's a lot of different ones. We've worked with communities that have done a renovation of a downtown space for, $1.5 million, and it looks just stunning and has all the pieces that we just talked about, without the housing part, but the appropriate build out from an abandoned, beautiful historic building, all the way through to we're trying to help a community a little bit on creating what is going to be a $22 million redevelopment, which will have a old high school building, have a theater in it. It has a gym. It's going to have 22 loft apartment, whole 9 yards. So it can be a wide range on that front. In terms of the budget for the innovation hub itself, what we target is between $1.2 and $1.4 million for 3 years. So that for the whole 3 years. So that gets you your core staff and gives you the runway to figure out how to do this and do this right, and then be able to secure additional funding to be able to be successful. Working with us through the 3-step process of getting ready to be a part of the network. It costs approximately $50,000, and that includes answering another question here, includes doing the deep assessment work to understand where you are now. That's quantitative work, but also qualitative interviews and gets you a document. It's a strategy process so that you have an actionable set of mechanisms for being able to bring core partners together. There are some ancillary benefits from that strategy process of getting people at the table who might not always be at the table, but there's that phase, and then in supporting the pursuit of funding from the Build to Scale program and the matching funds that you need in order to be able to secure that funding at the national level. So that's what it takes to actually get this up and off and running. But the 1.2 to 1.4 million for 3 years is really what should be the target. And since the Build to Scale program is a up to $750,000 one-to-one matching program from the EDA, successfully applying for that and securing the match will get you there.
Thanks, Matt. One of the participants said, you mentioned leadership as an important element, and they are wondering what other community readiness indicators are necessary for effective implementation of the framework.
So what I would say is that it's a lot of things that are frankly quite intangible and hard to measure. It has to do with the willingness of core community partners to collaborate and to come together around this vision. It also is a commitment to changing the narrative about what's possible in rural places. I mean, that's one of the things that I think was the biggest surprise for me, was how hard we've had to work to change people's view about what's possible in small town America. And I sort of expected that from, you know, some of the folks in the big cities on the coast, but many times that narrative has percolated down to, you know, communities that have incredible potential, but are finding it difficult to say, yes, we can go ahead and build scalable tech companies and train people to be technologists and coders and IT specialists. And so the community's got to be, you know, excited about that change. It doesn't mean everyone needs to be ready, but there's got to be a core group that's willing to drive that forward. We have found a slightly better success rate for communities that already have some kind of software project shop or some kind of tech presence. It doesn't mean like lots and lots of companies, but even a small company that might have, you know, 3 or 4 employees that does, you know, software projects for other bigger companies or for the local market can serve as a nucleus for that kind of work and for those that tech talent that can then grow from there. And it's almost always seen as in their enlightened self-interest to encourage more people to come into it because it's good for their business as well. So that's those are the kinds of things that we certainly think makes it easier to stand something like this up. But other than that, you want a downtown that has you know, some vibrancy, or it's on the road to having some vibrancy. You want to have a 4-year college or university campus within a 40-mile drive time, and you should have solved for the broadband, at least having cable through most of the community, if not one of those you know, gritty communities that just went and figured out how to build fiber to the home.
Thanks, Matt. There was another question about tools to assess community readiness. I think you covered that already, but I was going to include here a link to what I believe is your website. And I don't know if you have anything else to add about your community readiness tools.
Sorry. I am happy to send you the link if I can't find it super fast.
Yeah, I'm afraid
here.
I shared one maybe with one of your funders.
You did, and we are very grateful to the DRK Foundation for their support. But here is our website, and oops, let me try putting it to everyone. I think Norman already has my website. There we go. And if you go, let me just, I will send it along, but we do have tools that you can work through. And wait, is this it? No. Here, you should be able to find most of those materials and information about how we work at that subset of our website.
Perfect. Matt, we really appreciate your time today. This has been a really great presentation, and I know that we have a good group on here as well as others that will catch the recording. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us, and thanks to Norm Walser for the introduction. I would ask that participants fill out the poll question that Nancy's going to put on the screen and answer those questions about your knowledge gained today. Do want to mention that the next webinar in this series is scheduled for Wednesday, June 30th at noon, and we'll be talking about a housing toolkit. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Matt, for your time. Again, for those of you that are registered, you'll get an email with a link to the PowerPoint slides as well as a recording of today's webinar. So unless I missed something, Norm gave a thumbs up. That's always good. Nancy, is there anything I forgot to mention?
Oh, I don't believe so. Thank you.
Yep. Matt, you're getting some great comments in the chat box as well. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you all.
Have a-
Great to be with you.
Have a great day, everyone.